He was a student of mine. He'll probably talk about this a little bit. A student of mine at the University of Washington. He did his PhD with me, and this was the beginning of his it's an academic career, and which has led to many great and wonderful things. Mark is really known as sort of if I'm sort of the grandfather of virtual reality, he's sort of the father or grandfather. I'm not sure where you are in that, Mark, of augmented reality. Probably the father. Uh, and because as he'll probably mention in a few minutes, he was involved in starting the first AR company. And so Mark is a professor at both in Australia and in New Zealand, and he is a world treasure. So, Mark, I'm just going to let you tell us now how in the world you got started and what it was like hanging out with me over these years.
Great. Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks for being here, everybody. I'm sorry for the technical problems at the start. It looks like to restart everything, which took a while. But anyway, talking about getting started. So I just have a few slides to run through that kind of tells my story and then talks a little bit about empathic computing and what we're doing right now. But first of all, you can see this picture here. This is the young me in 1991. This is when I first met Tom Furness. So I went and I was offered the opportunity to come to the University of Washington. It was an unpaid internship, so I had to spend lots of my own money to fly over there. But I had to take it up. It was the only place in the world you could do virtual reality at the time. It was really easily, so I flew over there. And if you can show the next slide, please. And so when I got there, this is pretty much what we had. We had this very expensive VR system that was about $250,000, and you could create those very cartoon-like graphics that were about 2 million polygons a second. So and we had a VPL system that let you have a head-mount display input and glove input. And of course, now in the phone in your pocket has much more powerful graphics and better VR experience you can provide with that huge fridge-like system. But for me, it was like being in heaven, being able to create these simple graphics environments and fly through them and to do VR programming. Can you go to the next slide as well? Probably the most special thing about being at the HitLab, though, is the culture. And Tom did a fantastic job of creating an amazing experience with some very diverse people. So we had artists and engineers and musicians that were all collaborating together, wearing these big funky headsets and having Friday parties and the like. And one special person, well, there's Tom in his amazing pink shirt, and then this is Suzanne Weghorst, who was one of my advisors at the time. She's now owns a jazz club in Seattle. So if you're ever in Seattle, you can go to Egan's and watch jazz there. And then this guy in the green shirt here is Professor Hirokazu Kato, and he was one of my most important collaborators there. Can you go to the next slide? And so one of the things I did when I was there was work on this AR toolkit software. And so this is what Hirokazu Kato and I did. Kato was a visiting professor from Japan who had some computer vision experience. And I was interested in augmented reality, and so we were talking about that. And we started looking at how you could build augmented reality tracking systems, and nothing really existed on the market or was available at the time. And so he was an amazing computer vision researcher. So he built this AR toolkit software, which is the first open source AR developer kit for augmented reality. And we released that and subsequently had millions of end users. So that was a really great experience for me in terms of the power of collaboration, meeting somebody and being able to connect different skills together, and then also building community. Can you go to the next slide, please? And that software was used in my PhD research. This is the PhD I did was really about using augmented reality for collaboration. So you can see here some video avatars of remote people that were being brought into your space. And so it was the first time in the world anybody had looked at how AR could overcome that seam between the real and physical world. And so we had the ability to basically do video conferencing on your desk. And we found some really interesting things that happened with that sense of presence. I remember one person, we compared this to desktop conferencing with a monitor. And at one time we had the monitor going and the person in the real world moved themselves much closer to the monitor so they could be closer to the audio. So they felt they could speak better to the remote person on the other link. And then the person in AR, when we switched the AR condition, they had this virtual video of a person on the desktop. Then what happened at that time, they immediately shot back and gave that virtual image the same amount of space as you would have in a face-to-face setting. So that really gave a powerful unconscious cues that they felt the person was really there, even though they were seeing them in AR. Can you go to the next slide, please? So some of the really important things I learned from being at the HIT Lab and under Tom's mentorship was really the importance of having a vision. And Tom had a fantastic vision for the HIT Lab. And then also exploring the boundaries. So, with AR, I was exploring the boundary between the physical and digital world, but also in the HIT Lab was brought together all these people that were from different backgrounds. So we had musicians working with artists, working with engineers, and they were always trying to cross boundaries. And of course, VR is a very multidisciplinary endeavor, so it's more important to have that. And then building a team. So with the experience with AI Toolkit, we were able to create this open source software and then quickly build a group of people around to use that software, and that was a really great experience. And then also creating that community was a good experience. And then the overall message from Tom being in Tom's lab was the importance of putting people first and making sure that the technology was really people-centric and it was being driven by the needs of real people or helping to serve real people. So that was a great experience, and I was at the HIT Lab at the University of Washington from 2002 to 1994 till 2002. You can go to the next slide, please. And then from there, I went and started the similar lab in New Zealand. And so I was very much inspired by Tom, and I had the opportunity to return to the University of Canterbury in New Zealand and create my own HIT lab. And so I did that. Here's some pictures from that. At the bottom right-hand corner is the Prime Minister of New Zealand at the time, Helen Clark, coming to the lab for a demonstration. We built this kind of cave system. We had tabletop interactive systems and driving simulators and the like. And we built grew the lab to about 65 people, and at the time it was the largest AR VR research group in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's still going. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here's some of the projects we did. We developed the world's first mobile reality game in 2005, tennis game. We built a couple of years later the first mobile AR advertising experience with Saatchi & Saatchi. And that was a really interesting experience because at the time you had to pay for data to be able to use, at least in New Zealand. And so we built this little AR app that was 200K in size. And the 200K doesn't sound very much, but at the time, one of the telecom providers in New Zealand was charging 1 cent per K for a download. So you had to pay $2 to get this. And then their competitor was charging 10 cents, so you had to pay $20. So you can imagine people paying $20 to see, in this case, it was a little augmented reality zoo animals that would appear superimposed over your print ad in the newspaper. And then some of you may remember in 2011 there was a big earthquake in New Zealand in Christchurch, which devastated the city. So we built an app that allowed you to walk around the city and see, put back in place the heritage buildings that were being demolished at the time, so you could see what the city was before. About a third of the downtown area of Christchurch had to be demolished after the earthquake. So in this picture here, that's the first public library in New Zealand that was in the process of being demolished. And so with our app, you could go back and see it put back on site. So a lot of really fantastic, wonderful experiences. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to kind of reinvent myself. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Well, Mark, let's sort of stop here for a second. No, here you are. You've already had all these years of experience. Not in the two HIT labs, and
Right.
you had a chance to really become a authority in the area of AR and VR. And so, why would you want to change? Why? Now, you mentioned this reinventing yourself. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So maybe many of you who are listening have had the same experience when you've been in a career for a while and things are going very well, but you have an option to kind of look forward and where you think you might be in the future, and what it might be an opportunity to kind of restart, if you like. And for me personally, there was a number of things that happened. So one, I'd been in the lab now for 12 or 13 years. I'd been the year before, I'd been away at Google and done a small sabbatical working on the Google Glass project, and that gave me some opportunity to have some perspective. And then a year or so before that, I'd just gotten married, so of course that big life change as well. So my wife and I were thinking about where we want to be in the future, and with being at Google, I had the opportunity to kind of look at where I was going technology-wise, and I also wasn't quite sure if I wanted to spend the rest of my career all at one university. And I was getting to that point where if I'd spent much more time at university, it was going to be harder to move to other universities and still have a good amount of time career-wise. So one of my friends at the University of South Australia approached me, and he'd been able to raise some funding from the state government, and he said, "Well, you want to come and join us?" So that was kind of the opportunity to reinvent myself. And I had there was a presentation. This slide is from that presentation from Professor Hiroshi Ishii, who's from the MIT Media Lab. He's super famous. He does a lot of tangible interfaces. And he talked about, in this presentation, about creating a vision for technology. And in particular, he asked this very thought-provoking question: how do you want to be remembered by people living in 2200? What do you want to leave for them? And he said that because he said that, if you were to die today, maybe 10 years or 20 years' time, there will be people that would remember you, of course. But after 50 years' time, there won't be anybody really who's remember you directly. And then after 100 years' time or 200 years' time, there'll be nobody around who will remember you, and all that we're left behind is your legacy. And if you're in research or trying to make things that change the world, you really need to think about what will that legacy be, and what will you be leaving behind. And I don't have a slide for this, but he talks about how in technology, at least, you have these very fast cycles. So if you're being technology driven, the technology always changes every 18 months or so. So you have to have these very fast cycles. But if you have a good vision, your vision can extend beyond that, and you can have a vision that lasts for 50 or 100 years, or something that spans over technologies. So he talked about the importance of having vision-led research. And up to that point, with the HIT Lab in New Zealand and to some extent in the US, I'd really been technology-led. So I was looking at augmented reality and how we could build better augmented reality experiences. But at that point, I sat down and said, okay, well, what really is the vision, and where do I really want to go in the future, and how will that help people in what I'm doing? And so this slide here talks about that. So when I was thinking about that more, I thought about how really the communication is what really makes it important in this life. Communication is really essential to being a human, like John says. So I thought about what could I be doing
So, Mark,
to be help. Oh, sorry, Tom.
yeah,
Yep.
no, I just wanted to say that how many of you have had this kind of same experience that is Mark, that
Oh,
you
yes.
reach sort of a point in your career and you want to reinvent yourself and you're sort of looking ahead for your legacy? Yeah. Okay. You're not alone,
Some of
Mark.
you may, yeah, great. Some of you may be at that point now, and even as people, it's always good to try and reinvent yourself every year or every few years. So,
Mhm.
and it was kind of scary too, because I had built this HIT Lab and it was going really well, and then just taking a leap of faith and trying to create a new initiative is quite stressful sometimes and quite scary. But
Mhm.
anyway, I thought about communication, and I thought about communication trends. And so, can you go to the next slide? So there was really, my opinion, is these kind of three trends that was happening, and are still happening. So the first is towards improved content capture. So we've gone from, oops, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, great. I just saw a "you have been muted" button pop up, which is interesting. So I saw these trends. So the first, improved content capture. So we've gone from video conferencing, where you're basically sharing faces, to tools where you've got cameras on your head, and you can basically share a view of your surroundings. The second is increased network bandwidth. So when I first started in VR, it was 2400 baud modems, and with my apartment here in Auckland, I've got a gigabit fiber connection to my apartment. So it's fantastic for high bandwidth and really realistic conferencing. And then thirdly is implicit understanding, which basically means that machines can recognize your behavior and emotion. You can push a button and you can talk to Siri, and Siri will recognize to some extent what you're saying and how you're feeling. So you can go to the next slide. So these three trends, the trends toward very natural communication, towards being able to capture your experiences and surroundings, and to understanding, those I think were really important trends in the communication space. And they all overlap at this point where I called the area of empathic computing. So the basic idea of empathic computing is being able to use technology to help people better understand what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling. Of course, we all know about empathy. And what I'm hoping to do in our research is to use technology to create a deeper sense of empathy or understanding between people. And I think, in many cases, the problems we have in society can be traced back sometimes to lack of empathy or lack of understanding. We think other people are our enemies because we don't understand them, or we can't understand somebody's personal situation, so we can't reach out and connect with them. So that's the overall vision of empathic computing. And really, there's three aspects to empathic computing. One is being able to understand emotions, so building systems that can recognize your emotion and feeling, and that's been, for example, Professor Rosalind Picard at the MIT Media Lab in the field of effective computing. The second is experiencing, and systems help people experience the experience of others. And VR is perfect for this. So, for example, many of you may be aware of the work of Chris Milk and his company Within that allows you to have 360 video VR experiences. Or, of course, you can, well, right now we're sitting in this amazing library and we're experiencing something together. But in many cases, those experiences have been pre-recorded. So, with companies doing 360 experiences, you can take a camera to a refugee camp, you can record that experience, and then allow people later on to experience what it's a little bit like to be a refugee. And then the third area is really about sharing experiences. And so in our lab at the University of Auckland in South Australia, we're trying to build in this third space because really the ability to recognize experiences, effective computing is a really well-researched area. The ability to capture and record and create pre-recorded experiences has been, and there are thousands of people doing that in VR and very, very well. But there are very, very few people looking at this third space about being able to build systems that allow you to share the experience of somebody else in real time and understand what somebody else is seeing, feeling, and hearing in real time. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is kind of the overall research focus of my research lab, is can we develop systems that allow us to share what we're seeing, hearing, and feeling with others, but most importantly, in real time. And the next slide. So over the last 5 years, I've been building first a lab in Australia, and then a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to move back to New Zealand part-time, so I split my time between Australia and New Zealand. And we have about 30 people in both those locations, and doing a wide range of projects. So you can see here projects that relate to wearable AR and being able to share gaze and gesture cues, projects that relate to creating VR experiences that you can allow you to share somebody else's body and see what they're seeing, and projects relating to capturing and measuring people's emotion and looking at ways we can use technology to share that. And I'll just talk about a couple of experiences. Next slide, please. So this is one of our projects with the glasses. The basic idea is that if you put a camera on your head, you can see what somebody else, you can share that video to somebody else so they can see what you're seeing. But if you want to be able to see somebody else's view, it's really good idea to have a really wide field of view camera. But the problem with the wide field of view camera is that you don't really know where the person at the other end is looking. I might be looking at a coffee cup on my table, and the person on the other side who's watching the video may think I'm looking somewhere else entirely. So we built a system that had added eye tracking to a smart glasses and an augmented reality remote collaboration system. And so it allowed you to stream video to a remote person on the desktop, and but at the same time on that, they have your gaze point. And then the person on the desktop could also, with their mouse, could point and they share it back. So I'm not sure how clearly it shows, but on the right-hand side, that's the picture of the user interface. And there's a very small green dot, and the green dot is the mouse pointer of the remote person who's watching what you're doing. And most importantly, near that is a red dot, and the red dot is the eye gaze of the person using the system. So the system really allowed us to share some of the non-verbal cues we have in normal face-to-face communication, like gaze. And also, most importantly, it allows you to share implicit cues. So you can imagine, for example, if you're working in a very dangerous profession like bomb disposal, and you were about to cut the wrong wire in the bomb disposal task. Of course, people always look at objects before they interact with them. So having somebody watch you would allow you to know you're about to make a mistake before you make that mistake. So that was one that we did, and we found out that having the eye gaze really helped the remote person feel a better sense of connection with you. Can you go to the next slide, please? But one of the problems with that project is that you just had a video camera on your head, and so over the last couple of years, we've experienced and explored with doing 360 video sharing. So in this case, we have a person wearing an AR headset, and you can live stream the 360 video to a remote person who's in VR. And so for the VR person, they're in a 360 video of your surroundings, and it really does feel like VR. And then the VR person also, we have hand gesture tracking. Oh, can you go back to the previous slide? No, back. Great, thanks. So in the AR case, you see these kind of ghost hands floating in space in front of you, and the ghost hands can guide you to help you perform real-world tasks. And the most important thing is both people have independent views, so they can both look in different directions. But one of the problems with this one was that you just had a 360 video, and as you know from VR, you can't really move through 360 video. So you can go to the next slide, please. So we've just recently developed a system that allows you to capture the real world in real time. So here's a cluster of depth sensors, and when you capture points from each of those depth sensors, you can merge the point cloud together and create a 3D environment in real time. And so now you can have a remote person who is now able to jump into a live stream of your environment, and move through as in a VR space, which creates a much better sense of spatial connection. And can you go to the next slide? And then the most recent work we're doing is looking at how you can measure people's brain activity using EEG, and in particular brain synchronization. So it turns out in the real world, this is a really interesting phenomenon that happens, that when you have two people doing a real task, like on the left-hand side here, you can see two people pointing at each other and moving their hands in synchronization. When they do that, their brain activity, the phase of the brain waves captured by EEG comes into synchronization. And sometimes people report that they feel more connected, and they go into the psychology kind of flow state, and they feel much better connected to the person they're working with, and they learn faster and they perform better. So that's been studied for about 10 years in the real world, but nobody before has done that inside VR. So we're doing now, on the right hand side, you can see us doing the same kind of finger pointing task, but in VR. And so you can see an avatar across you, and then you put your hand out and you track each other's hands gestures around. We've seen we can reproduce those same results. And what we're trying to do now is look at how we can modify that and just discover really what is it about that experience that makes your brain come into sync, and can we provide visual cues that will enhance that experience and make it easier for you to get in sync with somebody else. So we're really kind of exploring the social neuroscience of collaboration. And can you go to the next slide? And so overall, you can see, of course, you're all aware of these different technology trends towards better displays.
Well, Mark, let me stop there. If you don't mind. This might be a good time to actually ask the audience if they could, just off the top of their heads, I'm sure you've thought about a lot of these things, but off the top of their heads, if they could suggest place or research projects or applications where they see this kind of empathic computing making an impact. So, Laurel, could you sort of take over and see what the audience may have to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our first person is F. You're on. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Hi.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Fantastic. Cool. So I'm a researcher into various areas of interactions of radiation with matter, things like developing new cures for cancer. Yeah. And I've for a long time been interested in applying VR because we have a lot of three-dimensional problems that maybe I want to visualize with someone sitting in Australia, someone else. I'm in the UK at the moment, right? Someone else sitting in Germany, blah blah blah, right? Yeah. So it kind of felt to me before I came into this meeting, there's a lot of potential, right? But I think the empathetic computing thing for me allows us to go even further. And I'm really interested in this thing about the EEG and the waves. Sorry, I'm just going to block this.
Oh.
Oh dear.
Okay. Just hold on a second.
Hopefully he comes back.
All right. He exited.
Sorry
about that. All right. Daniel, you're up next. Hopefully he will come back in.
All right.
Daniel?
Yeah, I've been listening to...
Hey!
Hi there.
Hey, Daniel.
Just move out here a bit. Been listening with great interest. I think loneliness could be a good application, maybe.
Oh, you're definitely right. So, and of course, in this kind of COVID era where people are staying physically distant, there's a big issue with loneliness. And so, with some of what we've been doing, we've been finding that if you can create AR avatars, and in your physical environment you have a life-size representation of somebody else, that helps a little bit with that, and it feels like they're really there. It's a little bit different from VR because seeing somebody in your real living room makes it feel like a more real experience to some extent than having to put on VR headsets and go to another place.
That's really
and then,
interesting.
of course, with some of the other physiological cues we're using, we're trying to measure emotional states. You may be able to measure people's response, and you know, if you are feeling lonely, then we can reflect that to somebody else who you're communicating with as well.
Interesting point you made about the difference between AR and VR. Recently, for college, we were lucky enough to receive some HoloLens, and I took it home to test it, and my son was all over it. And I really remarked on the fact, because we've had a lot of VR headsets in the house for a while, and they're there available for him. But he, occasionally tries it. But the AR headset was completely different, and I wondered why. I asked him. He said, "Well, with AR, I'm changing my world. With VR, it's some world that's changing. But with AR, this is my bedroom, and I'm putting lizards in my bedroom." There was a difference there. So yeah,
Interesting.
That's a really good insight, and that's also, I think, with loneliness, that's the thing too, is that you really want somebody to come to your space, because then it feels like they're part of a shared experience, or they're changing your world rather than going somewhere else. But of course, social VR is very important as well. But having somebody visit your place, and then with some of the cues we're trying to build the ability for you to share your space. So the one vision is that sometime in the next few years, you have to have a small handheld device. You can go to a location, click a button, and immediately start streaming a 3D model of that location to somebody else. And then the other person can come to that location. You'll see them as an AR person, but that person feels like they're really there as well. So that again helps address that feeling. That's a great comment. Thanks for that.
The end of distance.
All right.
End of distance. Yeah. Are there any other comments? Okay, Mark. Well, what is your call to action now?
A couple more slides.
Okay.
Yeah, just have a couple
Sure.
slides, and then we can just. So this is talking about the technology trends I said before, and we all know that these trends are happening towards. For example, this is a VR headset on the bottom with EEG electrodes on it, measure your brain activity, eye tracking, better graphics, and space capture. Go to the next slide. Yep. So, in many ways, these trends trend together towards something that might be called empathic teleexistence. And the idea is that using this technology, we can move from being an observer to being a participant, and it changes the nature of communication from really explicit communication to implicit. So many of you may, of course, remember in the pre-video conferencing days, we made phone calls. Oftentimes, when I was in Seattle, for example, calling home to my parents in New Zealand, a lot of times it was, can you hear me? Is that line clear? And even with early Skype calls, and now with Zoom, a lot of that is, can you hear me? Can you see what I'm saying? With this technology, because you're measuring people's physiological response, you know whether or not they're hearing you, and they're looking at you, and you're sharing that knowledge with you. And this really means that we can now have collaboration, which is about experiential collaboration, doing things together rather than you watching somebody else do something or being at a distance, which gets back a little bit to what Daniel was saying before about overcoming the tyranny of distance. Can you go to the next slide? So really, I want to close with an open invitation to say, well, I've talked a little bit today about how you can use AR and VR technologies to be able to create these empathic experiences, and showed you some examples of that. But would love to collaborate with some of you. There's different ways. You can, if you're in a company, you can come and work with us. If you're a professor, we can collaborate. If you're a student, we have interns all over coming to visit us. In fact, today is we've launched a virtual intern program, and this is an intern program that you can do while you stay at home because of COVID. So we've got a dozen or so students that are joining our lab for the next 3 months, and staying in their home countries, but working alongside our students and staff on a variety of different projects without leaving their home or their bedroom in some cases.
People are having trouble hearing you. Yay.
Oh,
make sure that
okay.
microphone
How about that?
on
Can you hear?
air are both on.
They are. Can you hear me now? Yep. So sorry about that. I think the host settings changed a little bit. So anyway, open invitation to anybody who wants to come and connect and collaborate. And of course, with the Virtual World Society, you have opportunities to connect on a bigger scale as well. I think that's the end of my slides. I think there's one more. Maybe it has contact details. I'm not sure what's there. But is there a next slide? Or
thank you so much.
Yeah.
We've got some information about the Virtual World Society. So Tom.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's
anyway, happy to have. conversation now, and we'll kind of open the floor for some discussion. And again, I'm sorry for the technical problems at the beginning. So, Tom, I guess you can handle that.
Okay, well, Mark, thanks for this. I mean, one of the things that and you covered this with a sort of a call to action. Mark, by the way, is on the board of directors of the Virtual World Society. He's one of the three triumvirate with Chris and myself, and he's really sincere about inviting you to participate with him, and he has great programs underway both in Australia and New Zealand, and now you can be anywhere in the world to participate in that.
Right.
So that's and I think he is leading the charge in empathic computing, which is going to be a very important part of where VR goes in the future. So before we open for questions, and I'm hoping that we can stay on for a little bit longer. Laurel, you'll have to let us know if we can do that. Laurel is if we can stay on for a little bit longer for questions. But let me just finish up with the slides to invite you all to participate in the work of the Virtual World Society, including things like what Mark has discussed, what Chris discussed last week with the issue of isolation and aphasia. Also, Ryland spoke before that. Ryland is here in the audience. Ryland, if you'll raise your hand, and Ryland is 19 years old and is already a pioneer in VR. He spoke at the Fireside before that. So let's invite you to participate in the work of the society. There is so much work to be done, and we love our family, our growing family, in doing that. Why don't you go to the next slide, Steve? And as mentioned, next week, in 2 weeks' time, we have another Fireside with Ben Locke, which is showing how he is helping students to learn about using VR and for good, VR for good in the classroom. And he'll be sharing his experiences and also a call to action from his standpoint. And then, of course, you see the next speakers coming up that already Chris has mentioned. And then the last slide here, I think the last one is Mark. Yes. So here's the contact information for Mark. Be sure to follow up on this. He's giving you an offer. This is working with one of the pioneers in the world, and this, especially in the AR and empathic computing space. So take him up on his offer. He's got gobs of money, and but he has a lot of good
Tom,
connections
do we
too.
have time for more questions?
Let's do.
Oh,
Now we want to open
I'm
for
happy to
questions.
stay for as long as you want. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got about another hour before I. Well, not that you'll be on for an hour, but another hour before I've got my next appointment. So
Okay.
Plenty of time.
Okay. So Laurel, are you able to field questions? Any questions you have for Mark?
Yeah. All right. Let's see. We have. Oh, F is back to finish what he was asking about before. So F.
Yeah.
Are you here? Nope. Okay. Carnegie, you're up.
Hi. Thank you. This has been a great session. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you great.
That's good.
Great. So what about the idea of having fireside chats on a national basis, like a broadcast? We have presidential fireside chats. Would that be possible?
Oh, that's a great idea. What do you think about that, Tom?
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought that was sort of what we were doing, but
you mean broadcasting on different platforms, like on the so more people can come, basically.
Yeah, with the empathetic focus, so we could feel, that.
Oh, I see what you mean.
With the empathy, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, well, that's our goal. The technology is going to take a while to get there, but we're developing a new 360 video streaming technology now that should allow us to stream to hundreds or thousands of people at the same time, and so that would allow more people to share more experiences. But go on, you're going to say something more?
Well, yeah, I was going to say it might be a way to kind of measure the sincerity of what our leaders are saying. And
Oh, wow! That'd be an accomplishment. Mark, you go to work on that, okay?
Yeah.
Go to work on that. Politician. We put a truth serum for politicians or something.
Yeah. One of my friends at the University of Canada about 8 years ago was doing some work with computer vision. He was saying that he wanted to have this working on debates, political debates, so you could tell live during the debate whether the politician was lying or not as they were speaking. So, and the technology wasn't quite there yet now, but maybe it is now.
But this is great. I plan to connect with you, so I'm going to reach out. Thank you.
Oh,
Cool,
wonderful.
for sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Great idea.
Thank you so much. All right. Next up is F. We're going to try again. F, are you here?
Oh, there he is. Hello.
I am. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sorry.
we
Yes.
can.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
So one of the things I'm really interested in is I run essentially a science user facility, and we're starting to move towards the idea of having people who are remote. So think of it like CERN, but smaller, less expensive. Yeah. And I think the empathetic element might be really, really valuable because, when I talk to my colleagues about we'll do this remotely, we'll do that remotely, and so on, they say, but there's no substitute for being in the room together.
Yes.
And I actually think it would be really good. There is a point when you're learning something at a very high skill level, you get in the zone together, And I'm sure that this thing you're doing about what's his name, EEG sync. I'm sure that's exactly that experience we've all had as researchers. When it's about people first, when you get in the zone together, I'm sure that's what's happening, So I'd be really, really interested to see how this could pan out in the thing about this facility remote research, because what we do traditionally now is we fly around the world to be with each other. But of course, things like COVID-19 have stopped that, I'd be really interested to see how that pans out. I'll definitely ping you an email later, Mark.
That's
but thank you very much.
We have a project with the Monash University in Australia looking at
All right.
what they call collaborative immersive analytics. So the idea they do a lot of data visualization, and they've been doing that over distance. But the idea is how can you bring remote people together to experience data sets together and have that similar experience what you're talking about.
So I think Monash are doing some not very different stuff. One of my former postdocs was from Monash. They're doing quite a lot of stuff in the radiation health area.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that that's a good area to target is they already have a restriction because of radiation safety about not being in the same physical room as their experiments. So there's already a direct win by adopting these technologies, really low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
Yeah. So that might be interesting with Monash.
Yeah, it's great. There's a company out there that some of you, if you want to have a kind of leading edge collaborative experience, there's a company called Spatial that has produced a tool that works both in AR and VR and lets people collaborate around looking at 3D data, 3D models, either in the real world, so you can see the content and you can see virtual avatars of people, or in VR space. And they're probably one of the best right now in terms of creating a shared sense of collaboration. It's a fantastic tool, but that tool doesn't need to have what we're doing, as I said before, measuring the brain activity, and as you said, kind of creating that flow experience. And what we were hoping to do is allow people technology to more quickly get you into that experience where you feel like you're really in sync with somebody and have that amazing collaborative experience that someone happens in the real world. That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing.
Other questions? Rel, do we have any other questions?
And I guess we don't have the URL for my website up there, but if you Google Empathic Computing Lab or my name, you'll find the URL for my lab. As I said, it spans both universities, and on that website you'll find many videos and research papers and other projects as well. And we certainly love to have feedback. As I said. About 4 years ago, we created this notion of empathic computing. We want to make sure, does that really resonate with people? Are people looking at how you can use using technology to create shared understanding? Is that what we should be going, or there are other directions we should be going in? But anyway, there was another question, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Might be a bit left field, but I know this work obviously centers around human empathy.
Yes.
Has there been any research done that you're aware of that involves remotely connecting with pets, animals, dogs, cats, that kind of stuff?
Oh yes, not just research, but I saw some commercial products. So, for example, there's a company selling a product that lets you remote operate a laser pointer that you can play with your cat, over distance, or you can remote feed your dog. And some of the remote feeders have basically FaceTime built into it, so your dog can see your face while you're talking to it. I do
Does
have a
that
friend.
come under the? Yeah.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
I just wonder if that actually comes under the umbrella of empathic computing.
Well, I guess if there was a way to measure the animal's response and with satisfaction, so that gets me to the other point. I've got a friend, Dad Stana, who works at Georgia Tech, and he's very famous in the wearable computing field. And about 5 years ago, he started developing technology to allow people to communicate with dolphins. So he built a wearable underwater computer, and they're spending time in the Bahamas right now, where they record the clicks and squeaks from dolphins, and they've apparently built some machine learning technology that can recognize and associate those with individual animals, and also with different requests or to some extent language. And so now he can go diving, and with this wearable computer, he can have a dolphin comes up, and it will start making some clicks, and the clicks might correspond to, can you bring me food, or do you want to play, or whatever. And so to some extent, there's some communication going. It's very early, but it's
that's incredible.
And I've got a friend here in New Zealand who's doing a similar thing with dogs, and looking at how you can use technology to communicate with them. So
amazing.
But yeah, that's not an area that we're working in our lab. It's a really fascinating space to work in, and I imagine there's a lot of opportunity. Of course, most of you who've got pets will swear that your pet can recognize how you're feeling and has different feelings as well.
So, Mark and Tom, it looks like we have a question from Caitlin in the audience. Caitlin, I'm going to switch you on air and to the megaphone. Caitlin, you should be on air.
Hi, Caitlin.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3.
We hear you.
Great.
Oh, great. Okay.
Good to see you, Caitlin. Welcome.
Great to see you too. Thank you for this. Mark, your talk was really inspiring, and I found myself thinking almost beyond language, because I think so often we think about empathy and think about, well, how do I translate my experience in words to you? But having people see what others see, I guess my question is, do you have right now a matrix of emotions for like emotion? Could be emotional intelligence training. I imagine some people who are trying to empathetically connect don't necessarily have the words to share what they're feeling. Deeper from eye tracking, do you have any either biofeedback tools that sort of apply some emotion sensibility, or do you have any kind of, I don't know, some method where a user in an experience could be documenting how I'm feeling in the experience and a sense, even if it's beyond words?
That's a really great question, and that's still a very active area of research. So there's no real black box where you can say that my heart rate is going up, so because of that I'm feeling excited, or I'm feeling in love, or whatever else. So that's a very active area of research, both in the psychology community and in our space. And in fact, in psychology, there's a debate going on now. There's a woman called Elizabeth Barrett who had this really great book about how the brain creates emotion. She said when she was a graduate student, she was doing a PhD, and oftentimes was working hard, not eating very much. And one of the PhD students in the same lab as her asked her out for a date. So they went for dinner, and during the dinner time, she said she started feeling butterflies in her stomach, and she felt, oh, well, I must be starting to feel some attraction with this man, and this is what feeling love feels like, or falling in love feels like. And then she got home from dinner, and shortly after, she threw up violently, and she had food poisoning. And so the point she's trying to make is that in the physiological cues that she associated with falling in love were also the same physiological cues with food poisoning, and context makes a big difference. So you can't just take people's physiological response and map it directly to an emotion, and so it's very, very complicated to be able to do that. And in fact, we have a project in our lab about using context and creating that. So we don't have that technology yet that can just create that exact mapping, but that's a very active area of research, and people typically map emotion or map physiological response to this arousal valence matrix or two-dimensional display. And then the question is how do you also represent it to somebody else? So when you're feeling an emotion, do you on your screen have a text message saying I'm feeling happy, or do you have an arousal valence map, or do you play some audio? Or in fact, University of Washington a couple of years ago were doing, and there's a technology called TMS, which is basically you put a magnet on somebody's head, and you turn the magnet on, and you can stimulate parts of the brain. And by doing that, you can actually make people feel certain things. So you can put a magnet on part of the brain, turn it on, and the person starts to feel a little bit depressed, or they start to feel a bit excited. So the potential is there for some decades in the future to have technology where you can directly experience somebody else's emotions. Of course, many years in the future, maybe my grandkids' time or something like that. But I can imagine sometime where you'll be able to reflect your emotions, somebody else be able to feel exactly what you're feeling at that time.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Yeah, and definitely cross cultures. Maybe there's a cultural way of experiencing. I've been following, I think it's Lisa Feldman Barrett at MIT, who does some research in AI and emotion. And
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to keep in touch with you about that, because
Sure.
it's not so linear, right? Like if you could feel
Exactly.
somatically how I feel, it might be a different feeling in your body than you would feel it naturally.
Exactly. I think the cross culture is really important too. So in her book about brain creating emotions, she talks about Paul Ekman, how and Ekman's very famous for these classic emotions that show photographs of people and around the world, and people be able to associate with this. But then she said that when they took those pictures, went out to places in Africa or very different cultural countries, that people would look at those faces and weren't able to associate some emotions with those faces, because in their cultures, you didn't express disgust in that same face expression or in those same ways. So it's very important to take into account that cross-cultural differences, which is another area that not many people have researched in. So there's huge possibilities for research in this space.
Thank you so much.
So Mark, are you telling me that when my wife feels like she's about to throw up, I can tell her she's just in love with me?
Yeah, well, hopefully you don't make her want to feel like she should throw up while she's around you, but definitely, yeah. I guess context is key, If this is the case.
Hey guys, Laurel's just having a little problem. Can I call up another question for you guys? Is that
Yes,
good?
Donna, thank you. You bet.
Yeah, no problem. Tim, I don't believe you've asked your question. I'm going to amplify your voice right now.
Oh, hello there.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, so first thing is, I'm here standing next to my dad, so we're actually enjoying the show together.
Oh, lovely.
Wonderful.
Oh, you
So
just
now we've lost you. Yeah.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I see they're playing with my mic a bit.
And, there we go.
I
can hear you now. Yep.
And I can see that there is a bit of a trend going on. If I compare how the internet started and how VR is starting, and that is when internet started, we were very limited as to the type of websites we could go to, how to download music, and very limited scope. And if I look at the trend, and obviously, not everybody agreed with internet, and it was almost wrong to have it in some ways. But I mean, me and my dad, we obviously kept going, and we understood that technology was the future. Now VR has come, and it seems like we are in that space where we are in a limited opportunities that we can take. For example, Alt Space VR, and maybe there's 3 other on Oculus that we can join. My question is, just to cut everything short, do you see in the future where VR becomes a space on, instead of what is available, rather than instead where it becomes a world like the internet's become, where we can go where we want to go, we can join classes, we can join, if we're into cooking or investments or business, and we don't even have to think twice. Rather than see what is available, we just go to a search and then we go into that space as if it's second nature. Do you see that as a possibility for the future for civilizations or digital civilians going forward?
Oh, definitely. So first of all, of course, with outspace, there's some extent you can do that already. You can go into outspace any time of the day, and there are a range of events you can jump into. But this year, of course, Facebook is launching their Facebook Horizon platform, and that's supposed to be a global scale, large scale social VR network that allows you to create your own content, share, and live inside VR, on a large scale. And there are other examples of people who have done things with Second Life for a while, and things like that. So it's been a goal for a long time. I think Facebook has the scale and ability to pull that off. There are other competitors, of course, as well. But definitely, I think by the end of this year, you'll be able to join a much larger social environment than Outspace, and you'll be able to feel like you're in a space with hundreds or thousands of people together, all sharing together. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to see that also with conferences. So those of you in academia, of course, and other people will know that most physical conferences have now moved to online. And so over the last 3 months, I've been experiencing a number of different conferences online. I went to the Wearable virtual VR conference that is normally held physically in Laval, France, and it's a fantastic event where they get around 4,000 or 5,000 people come together for a conference, and they have an open day for the public with about 10,000 people come. And this year it was all cancelled, but they moved online using a platform called Wearable, and Wearable allows you to have, I think it was 1,000 people at the same time online, and then you go onto this into this campus. And then they would have multiple speakers at the same time, and you go into a different room and you hear different speakers. And so I would go to sessions where there would be 200 or 300 people sitting, and there'll be an avatar on the stage speaking, just like we're now. So yeah, so definitely this year is the year I think you'll start seeing more of that. And of course, it's going to get better. So I wouldn't be surprised within 5 or 10 years if people were spending, not all their lives, of course, but it would be very common for people to go to events online and rather than flying halfway across the world to go to Laval in France, I'll just jump into the conference after dinner from my home in New Zealand and have an experience which is very much like you. So it's great news for you and your dad. You'll be able to do that over the coming, and definitely I actually would have thought that Facebook would have launched Horizon by now, but I guess because of COVID and other things there's been some delays, but I think later.
Okay, we're ready for another question. Desert, I'm just going.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
We should be able to hear you, Desert.
Yes, thank you. I've only been here for the last 20 minutes or so, so I came a little bit late. I apologize if I missed some of the discussion. I'm looking at the photo here, and Mark is wearing some very special glasses, it would seem. Those don't happen to be Apple Glass, do they? Is it possible to describe what they are?
No, they would. That's the Google Glass. So that's a picture from me from 2013 when Google Glass was becoming very popular. And of course, there's actually an interesting lesson to learn from Google Glass. It was amazing technology, but it wasn't really designed, or when they built it, they really didn't really think about the social elements of it. And so it's a great lesson to be learned around having technology-driven projects rather than social-driven projects. Some of you will remember, of course, Google Glass had a lot of hype, and then people started wearing them to bars, and Robert Scoble appeared in the shower wearing Google Glass, and then there was a big, huge backlash about that. And so there's an important lesson to be learned there about how we should make sure the technology we're building really meets people's needs. So no, there aren't Apple glasses, although there's lots of rumors going around about that, and people saying next year, the year next year after, something will appear. But there are now a wide range of other smart glasses that have similar form factors. North, with the North Focals, for example, provides smart glasses that are indistinguishable from real glasses in many ways. So if you want a smart glass wearable computer, that's a really great focus to have. But no, if I had Apple glasses, I'd definitely, well, if I was able to, I'd definitely be keen to show people, but I don't have any special insight into Apple glasses.
Well, thanks for those questions. If you had another, you're still on the board, and I don't know if you had another question or if this is still on the board from before. So can you just let me know if there was something else you wanted to say?
It is another question. Well, it's more a suggestion, actually. So
okay,
it's completely outside my domain of expertise, but it feels to me very often that we get hung up on very high back-end, front-end technologies, right? And very often we can do massive, massive things with quite low front-end technologies. So there's a little kind of parlor experiment you do where you show people a jagged shape and a curved shape. You say one's a kiki, one's a boo-boo, which is which? Because everybody pretty much gets the jagged shape to be a kiki, right? So it occurs to me that there's be a really cool empathetic experiment or project around just do a quick sketch of how you feel, take a photo on a mobile phone, and then get a back-end AI processing that sketch. You know, it feels to me it'd be like a real kind of great student project. They're right outside my domain of expertise, but it's the kind of thing where, because when we talk about the world and so on, the thing that has become ubiquitous in the developing world right now is the mobile phone. That has become the ubiquitous device. It's got massive penetration. So you can imagine starting empathetic computing on a very modest platform if a back end like that could be developed. So it's just as it's right outside my domain of expertise.
That's really clever.
That's a great idea. I have seen some art that was developed recently where people went into there was a augmented reality art piece. So you'd go into a gallery and there was pictures on the wall, and you had an iPad you hold up and look at the pictures, and you'd see this amazing 3D content coming out of the pictures. But after you'd experienced that, there was a touchpad, and they would ask people to draw how they felt after they experienced it. So it's pretty much what you're saying. They didn't do any interpretations of those drawings, but they collected them all, and then they reflected them back later, and you could see everybody's drawings. But that's a great idea, really good idea, and very low tech, so you can definitely do that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Nice idea.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. Your questions have been great. This is going to be probably your last chance to stick up your hand. So, Michael, I'm going to amplify your voice. You can go ahead. Is anybody hearing Michael?
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually Robin, but I'm wearing Michael today, so.
Okay. Hey, Robin.
That's awesome.
Hi.
I'm sure.
Mark, this was completely fascinating, and most of it's probably way over my head, but I was interested, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more, and also to make sure that I understood what you were saying about producing 360 videos that people can actually move around in, because that isn't really something that can happen right now.
Sure.
The socially together, in other words.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, this was motivated by a real problem that we're having right now, and in New Zealand with tourism. So, New Zealand's a fantastic place to come to be a tourist, but people can't come in now. And so we have these operators, for example, the wine industry or museums that have lost income. So we looked at 360 video, and we basically, of course, now for a relatively small amount of money, you can buy cameras that capture 360 video. And we took some of those cameras and essentially married them with an open source version of the Zoom software. Not Zoom, it's another platform called Jitsi. Jitsi is it's an open source video conferencing platform. But with our technology now, you can live stream 360 video to everybody who's connected onto that platform. And so now we're not quite finished yet, but in the next month or so, we'll have a piece of software and hardware written that will allow a wine operator or a museum guide to walk through a real space and then live stream that 360 out to everybody who's connected. And then there's some really interesting issues then about which will allow everybody who's connected to look in different directions and feel like they're experiencing the space. You can have a VR version of that as well. So if you've got a headset, you can live stream into the headset. But then you have a very interesting interface issue about how do you allow the people who are all now on this tour to talk with each other and also to talk with the host, and how do you allow the host to know where everybody's looking? So that's what we're looking at now. But we're hoping that that'll be tested in a month or so. And the great part about this technology is it doesn't require any downloads or installs. So you basically just go to a URL, and then you have a live video feed on your desktop as a 360 video. So it's very easy to use. And so we'd love to have people to help us with testing. So if you're interested,
I will definitely sign up.
And then
that is very close to things I'm interested in.
Oh, great. Well, and this is a stepping stone, actually. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to not just live stream 360 video, but live stream 3D spaces. And so we're working on technology that will capture 3D models of real space and live stream those. huge technical problems and massive amounts of data that you start sending around, and network bandwidth issues and spaces. So it's a really great area to be looking at. But certainly, I think within 5 years' time or so, you'll have some sort of small handheld device that will allow you to live stream your real world to hundreds of other locations, and have people at those locations feel like they're with you in space. And maybe in 2030, we won't be having outspace conversations in rooms like this, but we'll be able to actually remote join Tom in his living room and feel like we're really there, and see live people in the real world there, as well as AR and VR people, and and feel like it's really a shared image.
Brilliant.
So
yeah,
we're working on that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Robin. In addition to what Mark is saying, as it turns out, there are a number of companies that are really keen to do this, to be able to stream places rather than images of places. And this is actually happening today in sports, where you'll go up to a stadium, and Intel, especially Intel with their RealSense camera, will have dozens of cameras around the stadium, all imaging the game and the spectators and everything, and then crunching all the data, create a real-time 3D model of what's going on, so that you could be anywhere on that field. You decide where you want to be, and you actually get the perspective of being there while the game is being played. That is happening, and the technology is there. It is not very practical and affordable, for everyone, but it is happening. And Mark is some of the images that he showed us was where we can indeed begin to capture, and with software algorithms can synthesize often, we can make good guesses about what the 3D space is based upon limited data. And we're going to see those algorithms improve, I believe, and eventually the Holy Grail would be able to do as Mark said, so that we're able to stream the places with everything happening in real time as a model, as three-dimensional models that would be in there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, another great question. Okay, since we had audio issues to begin with, I think that we have one more question. So if you guys are up for it, Tom and Mark, we'll take one more question. Okay, so apologize if I'm butchering this name, but Kroller, I just amplified your voice. And you'll be our last question for today. Are you able to speak?
Quick sound check.
Oh, works. Go ahead.
Just great.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
Okay, and the name pronunciation was good. It's an amalgamation of my real name, right? So, yeah, the question is really a follow-up to maybe something you were spawning. I was kind of thinking for your endpoint devices, were you going to kind of enable the Google Cardboard setup for those that maybe don't have dedicated headsets to kind of increase your potential participant endpoint?
Sure. So with the 360 video in particular streaming, that's designed to be very low barrier to entry. And so all you need to have is, we're using WebXR as the, it's WebGL as the platform. And so you just have to have a web browser basically. So you could definitely experience that on a Google Cardboard type phone setup, or on a tablet or a desktop or whatever else. So it's definitely made available for very wide use. Although my understanding is that Google Cardboard is becoming less popular now. I mean, Google's no longer, they provide the software, but no longer really officially supporting it. So I think there's going to trend more towards the Quest and low-end VR devices. But our goal definitely is to try and make sure that we want to enable people to have remote tourism or remote visit experience with them just using technology they've already got in their home. So definitely.
That makes sense.
And I should mention, just in terms of logistics, I'm happy to stay around in the meeting space for a little bit longer if anybody else wants to talk to me one-on-one. It's no problem. Yeah. And I'm also happy to connect you with you and add on the friends list on Outspace and so forth, so we can connect later if you want to as well.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you more. Thank you for all your questions. We really appreciate you guys sticking with us today with issues. I think that that's part of our community in all space, right? That we're still pioneers after all these years that Tom has spent, that these guys have spent in VR. We're still actually pioneers of a new frontier. So thank you so much. So Tom, I'm just going to kick it off to you to close. Okay.
Okay, thanks so much, Donna and
You're
Laurel,
welcome.
and all who've made this meeting possible. Thank you for coming. You guys are wonderful, and because you're here, you're part of the family, and we really feel that. So, Mark, thank you for your time, and you had to get up early to do this, and we appreciate that.
It's okay, it's fine. And it's great to be part of it. And it's a really great family, actually, Tom. So it's great to be part of a great family. So I encourage all of you to try and stay connected.
You bet. And so we'll now just if you'd like to come up and chat with Mark or with me, we'll hang around for a while. And thanks for coming, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Be good.